The morning sun cast long shadows across the remote training facility in Nevada as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez stepped out of the military transport vehicle. The dust kicked up by his boots seemed to dance in the desert air as he surveyed the shooting range that stretched endlessly into the horizon. He had been called here for what his commanding officer described as an unusual assessment, though no one had bothered to explain what made it so special. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran of the Navy SEALs, a man who had seen combat in 3 different theaters and trained hundreds of snipers. His weathered face told stories of countless missions, and his keen eyes had an almost supernatural ability to spot talent from a mile away. Today, however, he found himself questioning why he had been pulled from his regular duties to evaluate what appeared to be a routine marksmanship test. The facility coordinator, a nervous-looking sergeant named Williams, approached with a clipboard clutched tightly in his hands. "Chief Rodriguez, thank you for coming out here on such short notice," Williams said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement that seemed oddly out of place for such a routine assignment. "What exactly am I looking at today, Sergeant?" Rodriguez asked, adjusting his cap against the glare of the desert sun. The briefing was pretty thin on details. Williams glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in closer. "Well, sir, we've got a situation that's got everyone from here to Washington scratching their heads. We've got a civilian contractor who's been consistently hitting targets at distances that are, well, let's just say they're beyond what we typically see from anyone outside of Tier 1 operators." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Civilian contractors were common enough on military installations, usually former military personnel who had transitioned to private sector work. But something in Williams' tone suggested this was different. "What kind of distances are we talking about?" "Over 3,000 meters, sir, consistently, with a Barrett 50 caliber." Williams paused, letting the numbers sink in. "The thing is, Chief, this individual has no formal military training. No sniper school, no advanced marksmanship courses. Nothing that would explain this level of precision." The numbers were indeed impressive. Rodriguez had seen plenty of skilled marksmen in his career, but consistent accuracy at such extreme ranges required not just natural talent, but years of intensive training and an almost intuitive understanding of ballistics, wind patterns, and environmental factors. For a civilian to achieve such results was virtually unheard of. "Who is this contractor?" Rodriguez asked, his curiosity now fully piqued. Williams hesitated for a moment before responding. "That's the other unusual aspect of this situation, sir. The contractor is a young woman named Sarah Chen, 26 years old, mechanical engineering background, hired initially to work on equipment maintenance and calibration. According to her file, she had some recreational shooting experience growing up on a ranch in Montana, but nothing that would indicate this level of capability." Rodriguez felt his assumptions being challenged. In his experience, the combination of natural talent and the physical and mental demands of extreme long-range shooting were rarely found in someone without extensive military training. The fact that this person was a young woman with no formal tactical background made the situation even more intriguing. "Where is she now?" Rodriguez asked. "She's down at the range, sir. Been there since 0600 working through her morning routine. She's been coming out here every day for the past 3 weeks, and the results just keep getting more impressive." As they walked toward the shooting range, Rodriguez found himself running through the various factors that contributed to successful long-range shooting. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, altitude, even the rotation of the Earth itself all played crucial roles in bullet trajectory at extreme distances. The mathematical calculations alone were complex enough to challenge experienced professionals. Yet Williams was suggesting that this young engineer was somehow accounting for all these variables naturally. The shooting range came into view as they crested a small hill. Rodriguez could see a lone figure positioned behind a massive Barrett M82 rifle, the weapon's distinctive profile unmistakable even from a distance. The figure was completely motionless, a statue of concentration that reminded Rodriguez of the most dedicated snipers he had worked with during his career. "How did she end up behind a Barrett in the first place?" Rodriguez asked as they continued their approach. Williams consulted his clipboard. According to the reports, she was working on recalibrating some of the targeting systems when she mentioned that she thought there might be an issue with one of the Barrett rifles. When the rangemaster asked her to elaborate, she requested permission to test-fire the weapon to confirm her suspicions. The rangemaster figured it was harmless enough, so he let her take a few shots. And? Her first shot hit dead center at 800 meters. Her second shot hit dead center at 1200 meters. By the time she was done, she had placed 5 consecutive rounds within a 3-inch grouping at 2,000 meters. Williams shook his head as if he still couldn't quite believe it himself. The rangemaster immediately called his supervisor, who called his supervisor, and so on up the chain until someone decided we needed to bring in an expert to evaluate what we were seeing. Rodriguez nodded slowly, processing the information. Even for experienced military snipers, such precision at those distances represented exceptional skill. For someone with minimal training to achieve such results on their first attempt suggested either an extraordinary natural gift or some factor that wasn't immediately apparent. As they drew closer to the shooting position, Rodriguez could see more details of the scene. The young woman was positioned in a classic prone shooting stance, her body perfectly aligned with the rifle, her breathing controlled and steady. Even from behind, her posture suggested someone who understood the fundamentals of marksmanship, though Rodriguez couldn't yet determine where such knowledge might have come from. The Barrett rifle itself was an impressive piece of equipment, a semi-automatic anti-materiel rifle capable of engaging targets at extreme ranges. The weapon required not just accuracy, but also the physical strength and mental fortitude to handle its substantial recoil and manage the complex ballistic calculations necessary for effective long-range engagement. Rodriguez paused about 50 meters from the shooting position, not wanting to disturb the shooter's concentration. He could see that she was preparing for another shot, her movements deliberate and methodical. Whatever he was about to witness, he sensed it would challenge many of his preconceptions about marksmanship and natural talent. Rodriguez watched in complete silence as Sarah Chen adjusted her position behind the massive Barrett rifle. Her movements were fluid and precise, each adjustment calculated and purposeful. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she seemed to become one with the weapon, her entire being focused on the distant target that appeared as nothing more than a tiny speck to the naked eye. The target she was aiming for was positioned at an almost impossible distance. Rodriguez pulled out his rangefinder and confirmed what Williams had told him. 247 meters. At that distance, the bullet would be in flight for several seconds, subject to countless variables that could throw off even the most experienced marksman. Wind conditions alone could shift a bullet several feet off target, and that was assuming perfect calculation of all other factors. Sarah's breathing pattern caught Rodriguez's attention. She was using a technique that he recognized from advanced sniper training, a controlled breathing cycle that would minimize body movement at the moment of firing. Her heart rate appeared to be perfectly controlled, another sign of someone who understood the physiological demands of precision shooting. Yet, according to her file, she had never received formal training in these techniques. Through his binoculars, Rodriguez could see Sarah making minute adjustments to the rifle's scope. The Barrett was equipped with a high-end telescopic sight, but even the best optics required skilled interpretation to be effective at such extreme ranges. She seemed to be factoring in multiple variables simultaneously: wind speed, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients that would affect bullet trajectory. Williams whispered beside him. She's been studying the conditions for about 20 minutes now. She does this before every shot, like she's reading the environment itself. Rodriguez nodded, fascinated by what he was observing. The ability to read environmental conditions was something that typically took years to develop. Most snipers relied on sophisticated meteorological equipment and ballistic computers to make the calculations necessary for extreme long-range shots. Sarah appeared to be doing these calculations intuitively, using nothing more than her observations of wind patterns, mirage effects, and other environmental indicators. The moment of firing approached. Sarah's body became completely still. Her breathing paused at the natural respiratory pause that every trained marksman learned to recognize. Rodriguez found himself holding his own breath as he watched through his binoculars, waiting for the shot that would either confirm or dispel the extraordinary claims he had been hearing. The Barrett erupted with its distinctive boom, the massive muzzle brake redirecting the blast in a controlled pattern that helped manage the rifle's substantial recoil. Sarah absorbed the recoil with perfect form, her body positioned to handle the weapon's power without losing sight, picture, or stability. The sound echoed across the desert landscape, a thunderous announcement that a projectile was now racing toward its distant target. Rodriguez immediately shifted his attention to the target area, using his spotting scope to track the bullet's impact. The projectile's flight time at this distance would be approximately 4 seconds, during which atmospheric conditions could still influence its path. He counted silently, his experienced mind automatically, calculating the approximate time of flight based on the distance and the Barrett's ballistic characteristics. The impact was visible through the scope as a small puff of dust and debris exactly where the target center should be. Rodriguez adjusted his magnification to get a better view, hardly believing what he was seeing. The bullet had struck within inches of the target center, an incredible feat of marksmanship that would have been impressive even from a veteran sniper with decades of experience. Direct hit, Williams confirmed, consulting his own spotting equipment. That makes 7 consecutive hits at this distance over the past 3 days. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars and looked at Sarah, who was already beginning to reload for another shot. Her movements were calm and methodical, showing no signs of excitement or surprise at what she had just accomplished. To her, it seemed, this level of accuracy was simply normal. "I need to talk to her," Rodriguez said, his mind racing with questions about how such marksmanship was even possible without formal training. Williams nodded, and they approached the shooting position. As they drew closer, Rodriguez could see more details of Sarah's setup and technique. Her equipment was standard military issue, nothing exotic or unusual that might explain her exceptional performance. The rifle itself was well maintained, but showed signs of regular use, suggesting that she had been practicing consistently. Sarah seemed to sense their approach and turned from her prone position. Rodriguez got his first clear look at the young woman who had been creating such a stir among the military personnel at the facility. She was smaller than he had expected, probably no more than 5'6", with an athletic build that suggested physical fitness, but not the heavily muscled frame he associated with most Barrett operators. Her eyes were what struck him most immediately. They had an intensity and focus that he recognized from other exceptional marksmen he had known throughout his career. There was something almost analytical about her gaze, as if she was constantly processing and evaluating information in ways that others might miss. "Sarah Chen?" Rodriguez asked, extending his hand. "I'm Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. I've been asked to observe your shooting and provide an assessment." Sarah accepted his handshake with a firm grip that spoke of confidence without arrogance. "I'm honored to meet you, Chief. Sergeant Williams mentioned that you had extensive experience with long-range marksmanship." Her voice was calm and professional, without any of the nervousness or excitement that Rodriguez might have expected from someone who was achieving such unusual results. She spoke as if extreme long-range accuracy was simply part of her normal routine. "I have to ask," Rodriguez said, settling into a crouch beside her shooting position. "Where did you learn to shoot like this? Your file indicates minimal formal training, but what I just witnessed represents skills that typically take years to develop." Sarah paused thoughtfully before answering, her gaze shifting toward the distant target. "I grew up on a ranch in Montana where long-range shooting was a practical necessity. We had problems with predators threatening livestock, and sometimes the only way to deal with them was from a distance. My grandfather taught me to read wind and weather patterns, to understand how the environment affects bullet flight." Rodriguez nodded, understanding that ranch life could indeed provide practical shooting experience. However, the distances involved in predator control were typically measured in hundreds of meters, not thousands. There had to be more to her background than she was revealing. But this level of precision at these distances, Rodriguez pressed gently, that goes well beyond typical ranch shooting. The ballistic calculations alone are extremely complex. Sarah smiled slightly, an expression that suggested she was used to this question. "I suppose my engineering background helps with the mathematical aspects. I tend to think of ballistics as applied physics, projectile motion, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics. Once you understand the underlying principles, the calculations become more intuitive." The explanation made sense to a degree, but Rodriguez had known plenty of engineers who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, despite understanding the theoretical principles involved. There was clearly something more at work here, some combination of natural talent, analytical ability, and possibly experience that she wasn't fully revealing. Rodriguez decided to test Sarah's abilities more systematically. If her claims about intuitive ballistic calculations were true, She should be able to explain her decision-making process in detail. He gestured toward the distant target, barely visible as a small dot on the horizon. "Walk me through your next shot," he said. "Tell me exactly what you're thinking and why." Sarah nodded and returned to her shooting position behind the Barrett. She began a methodical analysis of the conditions, speaking aloud as she made her observations. "Current wind speed at our position is approximately 8 miles per hour from the southwest, but I can see vegetation movement at different distances that suggest the wind is shifting to more westerly direction about halfway to the target." Rodriguez pulled out his handheld weather station and checked the readings. Sarah's estimate of local wind conditions was remarkably accurate. More impressive was her ability to read wind patterns at distance, something that required careful observation of environmental indicators that most people would never notice. "The temperature has risen about 3 degrees since my last shot 30 minutes ago," Sarah continued, "which will slightly decrease air density and reduce drag on the projectile. The mirage pattern I'm seeing through the scope suggests a temperature gradient that will cause the bullet to rise, slightly more than my previous calculations accounted for." Rodriguez watched her make tiny adjustments to the scope's elevation turret, movements so small they would have been meaningless to an inexperienced shooter. Yet each adjustment represented a precise calculation based on her reading of atmospheric conditions. The level of environmental awareness she was demonstrating typically took years of dedicated training to develop. "Range to target is 3,247 meters, as confirmed by laser rangefinder," Sarah said, consulting a small device attached to her rifle. "Flight time will be approximately 4.2 seconds, during which the Earth's rotation will cause a deflection of roughly 6 inches to the right." Compensating for Coriolis effect, Rodriguez felt his eyebrows rise involuntarily. The Coriolis effect, the influence of the Earth's rotation on long-range projectiles, was an advanced ballistic consideration that many military snipers never fully mastered. For Sarah to factor it into her calculations as a matter of routine suggested a level of ballistic knowledge that went far beyond casual ranch shooting. "Bullet drop at this distance with current atmospheric conditions will be approximately 37 feet, Sarah continued, making additional scope adjustments. "The Barrett's 50 BMG round will retain sufficient velocity and energy for effective target engagement, though environmental factors become increasingly critical at this range." Her analysis was not only accurate, but delivered with the confidence of someone who had performed these calculations countless times. Rodriguez found himself wondering if there might be more to Sarah's background than she had initially revealed. The level of technical knowledge she was demonstrating suggested formal study or training that went beyond casual interest. "How long have you been shooting at these distances?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah paused in her preparations and looked up from the scope. "Honestly, only about 6 months. When I first arrived here and saw the long-range facility, I was curious about the maximum effective range of the Barrett system. I started with shorter distances and gradually worked my way out as I became more comfortable with the weapon and the calculations involved." 6 months. Rodriguez had trained military snipers who took longer than that to achieve consistent accuracy, at half the distance Sarah was attempting. Either she was being modest about her previous experience, or she possessed an almost supernatural natural talent for long-range marksmanship. "What made you want to try extreme long-range shooting in the first place?" Rodriguez asked, genuinely curious about her motivation. Sarah smiled as she continued her pre-shot routine. "I suppose it appeals to the problem-solving aspect of my engineering background. Every shot is essentially a complex physics problem, with multiple variables that need to be solved in real time. The immediate feedback when you see the bullet impact tells you exactly how accurate your calculations were." Her explanation resonated with Rodriguez's own experience with precision marksmanship. The best snipers he had known were those who approached shooting as both an art and a science, combining intuitive understanding with rigorous analytical thinking. Sarah seemed to embody both aspects naturally. "The challenge of extreme long-range shooting is that there's no room for approximation," Sarah continued. "Every variable matters. Wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, altitude, even barometric pressure. Miss any one factor or make a small error in calculation, and you'll miss the target by several feet." Rodriguez nodded, appreciating her understanding of the complexities involved. He had seen experienced military marksmen struggle with shots at half the distance Sarah was attempting, defeated by their inability to accurately account for all the environmental variables affecting bullet trajectory. Sarah settled into her final shooting position, her body alignment perfect and her breathing controlled. Rodriguez could see through his binoculars that she was making final microscopic adjustments to her scope, fine-tuning her point of aim based on her environmental analysis. "Shot will be taken at the bottom of my natural respiratory pause," Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to Rodriguez. "Trigger control smooth and straight back. Follow-through maintained until bullet impact." The technical aspects of her shooting were flawless, but Rodriguez was equally impressed by her mental approach. She exhibited the calm confidence that he associated with elite military marksmen, showing no signs of stress or uncertainty, despite the challenging nature of the shot she was attempting. "Are you ready for me to call the shot?" Rodriguez asked, referring to the practice of having an experienced observer predict the bullet's impact based on their assessment of the shooter's technique and environmental conditions. "Go ahead," Sarah replied, settling into perfect stillness behind the Barrett. Rodriguez studied the conditions one more time through his own optics, factoring in everything he could observe about wind patterns, atmospheric conditions, and Sarah's shooting position. Based on his assessment, he predicted the bullet would impact slightly high and to the right of center, though still within the target area. Sarah's breathing stopped at the natural pause. Her entire body became motionless and her finger began the slow, steady pressure on the Barrett's trigger that would release another thunderous shot across the Nevada desert. Rodriguez found himself holding his breath as well, anticipating the moment when Sarah's calculations and skills would be put to the ultimate test. The Barrett's roar split the desert air with its characteristic thunder, sending another .50 caliber projectile racing toward the distant target. Rodriguez immediately shifted to his spotting scope, tracking the impact point while Sarah maintained her shooting position with perfect follow-through. The seconds stretched out as the bullet crossed the vast distance, subject to every environmental variable they had discussed. When the impact came, Rodriguez could hardly believe what he was seeing through his scope. The bullet had struck dead center in the target, creating a perfect hole exactly where Sarah had aimed. His prediction of a high right impact had been completely wrong. Sarah's calculations had been flawless. "Center hit," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Perfect placement." Sarah finally relaxed her shooting position and looked up with a satisfied expression. "The wind shift I observed halfway to the target was more significant than I initially calculated. I made a last-second adjustment to compensate." Rodriguez lowered his spotting scope and stared at the young woman who had just demonstrated shooting skills that surpassed many of the elite military marksmen he had trained over his career. The casual way she discussed making last-second adjustments to compensate for changing wind conditions at over 3 kilometers distance spoke to a level of intuitive marksmanship that was simply extraordinary. "That makes 8 consecutive hits at this distance," Williams noted, consulting his logbook, "with 7 different wind conditions and varying atmospheric factors." Rodriguez was beginning to understand why Sarah's shooting had attracted attention all the way up the chain of command. Consistency at extreme ranges was far more impressive than occasional lucky shots. What Sarah was demonstrating suggested not just natural talent but a repeatable methodology that could be relied upon under various conditions. "I'd like to see you engage multiple targets at different distances," Rodriguez said, his mind already formulating a more comprehensive test of Sarah's abilities. "Can you transition between targets and make the ballistic adjustments quickly?" Sarah nodded confidently. "The facility has targets set up at 1500, 2200, and 2800 meters, in addition to the one I've been using at 3,147 meters. I can engage them in sequence if you'd like to observe." The idea of rapid transitions between targets at such distances was challenging even for experienced military snipers. Each distance required completely different ballistic calculations, scope adjustments, and environmental considerations. Most marksmen would need several minutes between shots to make the necessary calculations and equipment adjustments. "How long do you typically need between targets?" Rodriguez asked. "About 30 to 40 seconds for scope adjustments and environmental assessment," Sarah replied. "The ballistic calculations for each distance are straightforward once you account for current conditions." Rodriguez exchanged glances with Williams. 40 seconds was an impressively short transition time for such dramatic changes in distance and ballistic requirements. Most military snipers would require 2 to 3 minutes to make equivalent adjustments with confidence. Sarah began setting up for the multiple target engagement, consulting a small notebook where she had apparently recorded ballistic data for various distances and conditions. Rodriguez could see pages of calculations, environmental observations, and adjustment notes that spoke to a systematic approach to developing her long-range shooting capabilities. "You've been keeping detailed records," Rodriguez observed, gesturing toward the notebook. "Engineering habit," Sarah explained with a smile. "I treat each shooting session like an experiment. Recording conditions, results, and observations helps me identify patterns and improve my accuracy over time." The scientific approach to marksmanship was something Rodriguez could appreciate. The best snipers he had known were those who combined natural talent with systematic study and continuous improvement. Sarah appeared to have developed such an approach independently, without formal military training or guidance. "Let me see your data," Rodriguez requested, genuinely curious about how Sarah was documenting her shooting experiences. Sarah handed over the notebook, and Rodriguez was immediately impressed by the level of detail in her records. Each entry included precise environmental conditions, scope settings, bullet performance data, and detailed analysis of any factors that might have affected accuracy. The notes read like a professional ballistic research journal. "You're tracking atmospheric pressure variations and their effect on bullet trajectory," Rodriguez noted, reading through several entries. "Most people don't realize how significantly pressure changes can affect long-range accuracy. I noticed that my point of impact was shifting on different days, even when wind conditions were similar," Sarah explained. "When I started tracking barometric pressure, the pattern became clear. A 1-inch change in mercury can shift impact point by several inches at extreme ranges." Rodriguez continued reading through the notebook, finding observations and insights that demonstrated an exceptionally sophisticated understanding of long-range ballistics. Sarah had essentially recreated much of the technical knowledge that was typically taught in advanced military sniper schools, but she had done it through her own experimentation and analysis. "Have you shared this data with anyone else?" Rodriguez asked. "Not really," Sarah replied. "I didn't think anyone would be particularly interested in my shooting hobby until Sergeant Williams started making a big deal about my range sessions." Rodriguez realized that Sarah genuinely didn't understand how exceptional her shooting abilities were. To her, consistently hitting targets at over 3 kilometers was simply the result of applying engineering principles to a ballistic problem. She seemed unaware that such capabilities were extremely rare even among professional military marksmen. "Sarah, what you're doing here is not typical recreational shooting," Rodriguez said carefully. "The level of accuracy you're demonstrating at these distances represents skills that most military snipers train for years to develop." Sarah looked genuinely surprised by his assessment. "Really? I assumed that anyone with proper training would be able to achieve similar results with sufficient practice." Her modest response revealed something important about her character. Despite possessing extraordinary natural talent, Sarah remained humble and eager to learn. Rodriguez had encountered plenty of gifted marksmen over his career, but many had been limited by ego or overconfidence. Sarah's willingness to approach shooting as a learning experience, rather than an opportunity to show off, suggested she had the right mindset for continued improvement. "I'd like to arrange for you to demonstrate your abilities to some colleagues of mine," Rodriguez said, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "Would you be interested in participating in a more formal evaluation?" Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. "What kind of evaluation are you talking about?" "The kind that might lead to opportunities to use your skills in ways that could make a real difference," Rodriguez replied cryptically, not wanting to reveal too much about the possibilities that were already forming in his mind. The truth was that Rodriguez was beginning to see potential applications for Sarah's unique combination of technical knowledge and exceptional marksmanship, skills that went far beyond civilian contractor work. But first he needed to verify that her abilities were as consistent and reliable as they appeared to be. 3 days later, Rodriguez found himself back at the Nevada facility, but this time he wasn't alone. He had arranged for 2 of his most experienced colleagues to witness Sarah's shooting demonstration: Master Chief Patricia Hayes, a legendary marksmanship instructor with over 25 years of experience, and Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, an intelligence officer who specialized in evaluating unique tactical capabilities. Both veterans had initially been skeptical when Rodriguez described Sarah's abilities. Master Chief Hayes had trained thousands of military marksmen and had never encountered anyone who could achieve consistent accuracy at the ranges Rodriguez claimed. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had seen too many exaggerated reports over his career to accept extraordinary claims without solid evidence. "So where is this wonder shooter of yours, Rodriguez?" Hayes asked with a slight smirk as they approached the range facility. Her tone was friendly but carried the skepticism of someone who had heard too many tall tales over the years. "She should be at her usual position," Rodriguez replied, checking his watch. "Sarah maintains a very consistent training schedule. She's here every morning by 6 and usually shoots until about 10. As they crested the hill overlooking the range, they could see the familiar figure positioned behind the Barrett rifle at the distant shooting point. Even from several hundred meters away, Sarah's professional setup and shooting posture were clearly visible. "I have to admit, her form looks solid from here," Hayes observed, raising her binoculars for a better view. "But form doesn't necessarily translate to results at the distances you've been claiming." Mitchell was studying the range layout through his own optics, calculating distances and assessing the technical challenges involved. "The target at 3,247 meters is barely visible even with magnification." "Are you certain about these distance measurements?" "Verified with multiple rangefinders and GPS coordinates," Rodriguez confirmed. "Everything has been double-checked and documented." They approached Sarah's shooting position quietly, not wanting to disturb her concentration. Rodriguez could see that she was in the middle of her pre-shot routine, carefully analyzing environmental conditions and making scope adjustments based on her observations. "Sarah," Rodriguez called softly when she paused between preparations, "I'd like you to meet Master Chief Hayes and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. They're here to observe your shooting demonstration." Sarah looked up from her scope and greeted the newcomers professionally. Rodriguez could see Hayes and Mitchell assessing her immediately. Her age, her civilian status, her apparent lack of military bearing. Both were clearly struggling to reconcile their expectations with the young woman positioned behind the massive Barrett rifle. "Ma'am, Commander," Sarah acknowledged respectfully. "Chief Rodriguez mentioned that you might be interested in observing some long-range shooting." Hayes stepped closer to examine Sarah's shooting setup more carefully. The Barrett was positioned perfectly, the scope properly mounted and zeroed, and all supporting equipment arranged with the methodical precision of an experienced marksman. Despite her initial skepticism, Hayes had to admit that Sarah's preparation looked professional. "What distance are you planning to engage?" Hayes asked. "I was preparing for a shot at 3,247 meters, Sarah replied, "but I can demonstrate at whatever distances you'd prefer to observe." Mitchell pulled out his own range-finding equipment and confirmed the distance to the target. The numbers matched Rodriguez's claims exactly. "That's an extremely challenging shot even under ideal conditions," he noted. "What are the current environmental factors?" Sarah consulted her notebook and weather monitoring equipment. "Wind is variable, averaging 7 miles per hour from the west-southwest but gusting to 12 miles per hour intermittently. Temperature is 72 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 31%, barometric pressure 29.87 inches of mercury and rising slowly." Hayes was impressed by the thoroughness of Sarah's environmental assessment. Most military marksmen relied on sophisticated meteorological equipment to gather such detailed atmospheric data. Sarah appeared to be collecting and interpreting this information using basic instruments and careful observation. "Show me your ballistic calculations for this shot," Hayes requested, her tone becoming more serious as she recognized the professional quality of Sarah's preparation. Sarah opened her notebook and walked through her calculations step by step. She explained how she factored in bullet drop, wind drift, Coriolis effect, atmospheric density variations, and temperature-related ballistic changes. Her mathematical approach was systematic and accurate, incorporating advanced ballistic principles that Hayes knew were typically taught only in elite military sniper schools. "Where did you learn ballistic theory?" Hayes asked, clearly puzzled by the sophistication of Sarah's knowledge. "Mostly self-taught," Sarah replied. "I have access to ballistic reference materials through my engineering work, and I've been experimenting with practical applications during my range sessions here." Mitchell leaned in to examine Sarah's calculations more closely. His intelligence background had given him exposure to advanced ballistic systems and precision shooting requirements. What he was seeing in Sarah's notebook represented theoretical knowledge that took most military professionals years to master. These calculations account for variables that many experienced snipers never learn to factor in, Mitchell observed. You're treating this like a complex engineering problem, rather than just a shooting exercise. That's exactly how I approach it, Sarah confirmed. Every shot is essentially a ballistic physics problem with multiple variables that need to be solved simultaneously. The engineering methodology I use in my regular work applies directly to long-range shooting challenges. Hayes was beginning to understand why Rodriguez had been so insistent about arranging this demonstration. Sarah's combination of technical knowledge and systematic approach suggested capabilities that went far beyond typical civilian marksmanship. If her practical shooting lived up to her theoretical preparation, they were witnessing something truly exceptional. All right, Hayes said, settling into a position where she could observe the shot through her spotting scope. Let's see if your shooting matches your calculations. Sarah returned to her shooting position and began her final preparations. Rodriguez, Hayes, and Mitchell positioned themselves with their own optical equipment to track the bullet's impact. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation as everyone prepared to witness a shot that would either validate or dispel the extraordinary claims that had brought them all together. Conditions are optimal for the shot, Sarah announced quietly. Taking the shot in 30 seconds, Hayes found herself holding her breath as she watched through her scope. In 25 years of training military marksmen, she had never seen a civilian attempt a shot of this difficulty with such confidence. Whatever happened in the next few moments would either challenge everything she thought she knew about marksmanship training or confirm her skepticism about civilian shooting capabilities. Shot ready, Sarah called softly, her voice calm and controlled, despite the pressure of performing under observation by 3 experienced military professionals. The Barrett's thunderous report echoed across the Nevada desert as Sarah's shot broke the morning silence. Rodriguez, Hayes, and Mitchell immediately focused their spotting scopes on the distant target, each tracking the bullet's flight path through their optics. The 3,247-meter distance meant a flight time of over 4 seconds, during which the projectile would be subject to every environmental variable Sarah had calculated. Hayes counted silently to herself, her experienced mind automatically timing the bullet's journey. When the impact came, she couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath. Through her high magnification scope, she could see the bullet hole exactly where Sarah had aimed, dead center in the target's scoring rings. Direct center hit, Hayes announced, her voice carrying a note of amazement that she couldn't quite hide. Perfect placement. Mitchell confirmed the impact through his own optics, shaking his head in disbelief. That's impossible. Nobody shoots that accurately at this distance without years of specialized training. Rodriguez smiled, having anticipated his colleagues' reactions. That's exactly what I thought when I first saw her shoot. Sarah, would you mind demonstrating the multiple target engagement sequence we discussed? Sarah nodded and began transitioning to the next target located at 2,800 meters. Rodriguez watched Hayes and Mitchell observe Sarah's rapid adjustments to scope settings and shooting position. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, showing none of the hesitation or uncertainty that might be expected from someone attempting such challenging shots. How long for target transition? Hayes asked, consulting her stopwatch. Usually about 40 seconds for scope adjustments and environmental recalculation, Sarah replied, making precise elevation and windage corrections to her scope. Each distance requires different ballistic solutions, but the fundamental process remains the same. Hayes was impressed by the speed of Sarah's adjustments. Most military snipers required several minutes to make equivalent changes when transitioning between targets at dramatically different distances. Sarah's ability to rapidly recalculate and implement new ballistic solutions suggested an intuitive understanding of long-range shooting that was exceptionally rare. Ready for target 2, Sarah announced, settling into position behind the Barrett. The second shot followed quickly, another thunderous boom that sent a projectile racing toward the 2,800-meter target. Again, Hayes tracked the impact through her scope, watching as the bullet struck within inches of the target center. The accuracy was consistent with Sarah's first shot, confirming that her success wasn't based on luck or favorable conditions. Another center hit, Hayes confirmed, This is starting to look like a systematic capability rather than occasional good shots. Sarah continued with the target engagement sequence, moving to the 2-eyed 200-meter and 1/500-meter targets in turn. Each shot demonstrated the same level of precision and consistency, with impacts clustered tightly around the target centers. By the time she had completed the sequence, Hayes and Mitchell were exchanging glances that spoke of shared amazement. 4 targets, 4 distances, 4 perfect hits, Mitchell summarized. I've never seen anything like this from a civilian shooter. Rodriguez decided it was time to reveal more about his assessment of Sarah's potential. I think we need to consider whether Sarah's capabilities might have applications beyond civilian contractor work. Hayes understood immediately what Rodriguez was suggesting. The military was always seeking individuals with exceptional skills that could contribute to specialized operations. Sarah's combination of technical knowledge and extraordinary marksmanship represented exactly the kind of unique capability that various defense organizations were constantly trying to develop. What kind of background check has been completed? Mitchell asked, his intelligence training automatically focusing on security considerations. Standard contractor clearance, Rodriguez replied, but obviously nothing at the level that would be required for more sensitive applications. Sarah looked puzzled by the direction the conversation was taking. I'm not sure I understand what you're discussing. Is there something wrong with my shooting? Hayes smiled at Sarah's innocent question. Quite the opposite. Your shooting is so exceptional that we're wondering whether you might be interested in applications that go beyond recreational marksmanship. What kind of applications? Sarah asked, her engineering curiosity clearly piqued. Rodriguez chose his words carefully. There are military and law enforcement organizations that have ongoing requirements for individuals with your particular combination of skills. Long-range precision shooting, technical analysis, systematic problem-solving under pressure. Sarah considered this information thoughtfully. Are you talking about sniper training? Among other possibilities, Hayes replied. The military invests enormous resources in developing the kind of capabilities you seem to possess naturally. It would be unusual not to explore whether there might be mutually beneficial opportunities. Mitchell was already thinking about the bureaucratic processes that would be involved in properly evaluating and potentially recruiting someone with Sarah's unique skills. Any such discussions would require extensive additional background investigations and evaluation procedures. I understand, Sarah said, but I have to ask, is my current shooting really that unusual? I've been assuming that anyone with proper training and sufficient practice could achieve similar results. Hayes laughed at Sarah's continued modesty. Sarah, in 25 years of training military marksmen, I have never encountered anyone who could shoot with your level of accuracy at these distances. What you're doing represents capabilities that most professional snipers never achieve even after years of intensive training. The statement seemed to genuinely surprise Sarah. I had no idea that long-range accuracy was considered so difficult. To me, it's just applied physics and careful observation of environmental conditions. Rodriguez realized that Sarah's engineering background had given her a unique perspective on marksmanship that most military personnel never developed. While traditional sniper training focused heavily on technique and equipment, Sarah approached shooting as a complex problem-solving exercise that required systematic analysis and precise execution. Would you be interested in learning more about potential opportunities? Rodriguez asked. Obviously, any serious discussions would require extensive evaluation and security procedures, but I think it would be worth exploring. Sarah nodded slowly. I'd be interested in learning more, though I have to admit, I never imagined my shooting hobby might lead to military applications. Hayes was already planning the next steps in her mind. The first requirement would be a comprehensive evaluation of your capabilities under various conditions. Today's demonstration has been impressive, but we'd need to assess performance under stress with time pressure and in more challenging environments. I understand, Sarah replied. When would such evaluations typically take place? Mitchell consulted his schedule and began coordinating with Hayes and Rodriguez. The process of properly evaluating Sarah's potential would require careful planning and coordination with multiple military organizations. But based on what they had witnessed today, all three were convinced that such efforts would be worthwhile. As they prepared to leave the range, Rodriguez reflected on how a routine assessment of an unusual civilian contractor had evolved into something much more significant. Sarah's extraordinary capabilities had the potential to open doors that none of them had anticipated when this evaluation process began. 6 months later, Rodriguez stood in a secure briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command, watching as Sarah completed her final qualification exercise. The room was filled with senior military officers who had come to witness the culmination of the most unusual recruitment process in recent memory. Sarah had exceeded every expectation during her comprehensive evaluation period, demonstrating not only exceptional marksmanship, but also the mental resilience and adaptability required for specialized military operations. The qualification exercise had been designed to test Sarah's capabilities under the most challenging conditions possible. She had been required to engage multiple targets at varying distances while under time pressure, in adverse weather conditions, and with limited preparation time. Throughout the entire process, she had maintained the same level of accuracy and professionalism that had first caught Rodriguez's attention. Final target engagement complete. The range officer announced over the communication system. All targets hit within acceptable parameters. Exercise complete. A murmur of approval rippled through the briefing room as the senior officers reviewed the final results. Sarah had achieved perfect scores on every phase of the evaluation, including assessments that many experienced military marksmen found challenging. Her performance had been so consistently exceptional that some observers had initially suspected her equipment was providing unfair advantages. Admiral Thompson, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command, turned to address the assembled group. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed over the past 6 months represents a unique opportunity for our organization. Ms. Chen has demonstrated capabilities that typically take years of intensive training to develop, combined with analytical skills that could prove invaluable in complex operational environments. Rodriguez felt a sense of pride as he listened to the Admiral's assessment. His decision to recommend Sarah for advanced evaluation had been vindicated by her exceptional performance throughout the training and assessment process. She had not only proven that her marksmanship skills were genuine, but had also demonstrated the character and adaptability necessary for military service. Sarah entered the briefing room still wearing her shooting gear, her face flushed with exertion, but showing no signs of stress or fatigue. The intensive evaluation process had tested her physical and mental limits, but she had approached each challenge with the same systematic methodology that had characterized her civilian shooting. Ms. Chen, Admiral Thompson addressed her directly. On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, I want to thank you for your participation in this evaluation process. Your performance has been truly exceptional. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied professionally. It's been an honor to work with such experienced instructors and to learn more about military applications of precision marksmanship. Master. Chief Hayes stepped forward with a folder containing Sarah's official evaluation results. Sarah, your final scores place you in the top 1% of all marksmen we've ever evaluated. Your technical knowledge and problem-solving abilities have impressed everyone involved in this process. Rodriguez could see the impact that 6 months of intensive training had on Sarah. While she retained her engineering background and analytical approach to shooting, she had also developed the confidence and tactical awareness that came with military training. She moved and spoke with the professionalism of someone who understood the serious nature of the capabilities she possessed. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who had overseen much of Sarah's security clearance and background investigation, presented her with another set of documents. Your security clearance has been approved at the level required for the specialized assignments we've been discussing. All background investigations have been completed successfully. Sarah accepted the documents with appropriate seriousness. The security clearance process had been thorough and sometimes intrusive, but she had understood its necessity for the kind of work that might be available to her. Her engineering background and clean personal history had actually expedited parts of the investigation process. The question now, Admiral Thompson continued, is whether you're interested in making this transition from civilian contractor to military specialist. The opportunities we can offer would make full use of your unique capabilities, but they would also require a significant commitment on your part. Sarah had been considering this decision throughout the evaluation process. The military had offered her opportunities to apply her skills in ways that could make a real difference, but it would mean leaving behind her civilian engineering career and embracing a completely different lifestyle. "I've been thinking about this decision for months," Sarah said thoughtfully. "When I first started shooting at long distances, I never imagined it might lead to military service. But the work you've shown me, the capabilities I could develop, the ways I might contribute, it's more meaningful than anything I've done in my civilian career." Rodriguez smiled at Sarah's response. He had hoped that she would recognize the unique opportunities that her skills could create, but he had also known that the decision had to be entirely her own. Military service required a level of commitment that couldn't be forced or artificially motivated. "There is one more aspect of your evaluation that we haven't discussed," Admiral Thompson said, consulting his briefing notes. "Your record-setting performance at 3,247 meters has attracted attention from multiple defense organizations. That distance, achieved consistently and under various conditions, represents a new benchmark for precision marksmanship." Sarah looked surprised by this information. "I wasn't aware that the distance was considered particularly significant. The previous unofficial record for consistent accuracy at extreme range was held by a Canadian sniper at just over 3,500 meters, Hayes explained. But that was a single shot under ideal conditions. Your ability to hit targets consistently at 3,247 meters under varying conditions represents a practical capability that has never been documented before." The recognition of her achievement in the context of military marksmanship history was something Sarah had never considered. To her, the 3,247-meter shots had simply been technical challenges to be solved through careful analysis and systematic execution. Learning that her performance represented a new standard was both humbling and encouraging. "So what happens next?" Sarah asked, looking around the room at the assembled officers who had been evaluating her potential. Admiral Thompson smiled. "If you're willing to accept it, we have an assignment that would make perfect use of your capabilities. You'd be working with some of the most advanced precision shooting programs in the military, helping to develop new techniques and training other specialists." Rodriguez felt a sense of satisfaction as he watched Sarah consider the opportunities being offered to her. What had begun as a routine assessment of an unusual civilian contractor had evolved into the discovery of someone whose capabilities could contribute significantly to military effectiveness. Sarah's journey from engineering contractor to military specialist represented exactly the kind of unconventional talent development that modern defense organizations needed to embrace. "I accept," Sarah said without hesitation. "When do we begin?" The room erupted in congratulations and handshakes as the assembled officers welcomed the newest member of their organization. Rodriguez watched with pride as Sarah took her first steps into a military career that would undoubtedly be as exceptional as the marksmanship skills that had started it all. Her story would become legend among precision shooters, proof that extraordinary capabilities could emerge from the most unexpected places.